I started studying bats in the 60s, okay? And at that, in the early days, there were very few people who studied bats. Now, it was discovered only a few years earlier that bats even had echolocation in what they used it for. When we started doing some really serious work in the 70s, some people were already using devices to listen to bat calls. And how did they even discover that some portable device would work for this? Well, someone discovered that on the market you could buy a thing called a leak detector, and that was to detect leaks, gas leaks in pipelines. And so we got one of those, and it worked, and it made these weird sounds, but it was sort of hard to connect the sounds with the kind of bat. And gradually you could sort of learn to do that, and you could identify some of the bats just by listening to them. And so this just all gradually developed over several decades. And during that time there were some real pioneers out there who were getting a lot of good data under rather difficult conditions with rather primitive equipment by modern standards. See, now this is an older model that I've actually been using this for 20 years. It's made in Australia. It's actually made of metal instead of high-impact plastic, like this thing right here. And this is now apparently one of the most popular models on the market. I can do that. It just does a good job. In the 50s, we had Japanese mist nets, and that was, revolutionary in itself, because many of the bats, especially here in the tropics, you never even see. You can't find them. As soon as you put up a mist net, some that maybe you've never even seen before, you discover they're really common species. Then some people got really interested in the structure of these bat calls and how they worked. Because they're ultrasonic. Until you have appropriate equipment and software, what can you do with them? So some really good software programs were issued, and they got better and better. I mean, they're really fancy now. Everything in colors and showing all the harmonics of the bat call, all these details. They also show a lot of noise and insects and some stuff you don't want to see. So we have, and that's really a popular field of research right now, is trying to figure out how bat calls work, what they do, what all the different bat calls mean, how they're used, etc., etc. And some people just looking at the structure, the details of the structure of those bat calls, because the bats we record with these devices are bats that have loud calls, and that includes like all the insectivorous bats. Well, those have been notoriously difficult to capture in the tropics. So there are always a few in museums. Somebody found them inside a hollow tree or wherever, if they just happen to find out where these bats roost. But now we know that many of these are the most common species, and you put out one of these bat detectors and you get lots of recordings. So in terms of just doing a simple survey of the bats that live in a certain region, and this is just beginning to spread around the world and be done everywhere now. Boy, you set one of these out and you find out. So it doesn't tell you how many bats, but it gives you sort of a ratio of bat activity among all the various species and an idea of where, because you can put this wherever you want. In some places you get this group of bats, other places you get this group of bats. There's a huge difference between, as you can imagine, between the top of the mountains and the beach. And you have all these different elevations in a country like Costa Rica. So, and you get all these variations in the amount of bat activity. There's more activity down at sea level than there is at, say, 1,500 meters, more or less where we are at now.